G'day guys, how are you? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing a review of an Australian horror film, English language, released in the year 2012, directed by Chris Sun, and this film is called Daddy's Little Girl. And the story to this film is as follows. From controversial Australian writer-director Chris Sun comes a multi-award-winning Australian revenge film Daddy's Little Girl, a story about a single father, his bond with his 6-year-old daughter, and his response to the most heinous of crimes. Derek would do anything for his 6-year-old daughter until she is suddenly torn from his life. As he comes to terms with his grief, he discovers the one responsible is closer than he ever imagined. What would you do? So the movie starts off with Derek. He is a father of this little girl. She's 6 years old. This little girl is Derek's life. He devotes everything to her, and he works really hard in order to give his little princess the best start in life. So he has since split with her mother, and her mother looks after her. So there is a busted window, and Derek is constantly hounding his ex-partner to fix the window because it's a rough sort of area, but she says, I'll get around to it, don't worry about it. So one night, Derek's 6-year-old daughter goes missing, and it turns out that she was murdered and possibly molested. So this has absolutely torn everyone to pieces. Chris has gone down a path of depression. He wants to find the killer. The police don't have any leads, so he's begun to think that this is going to be an unsolved case forever. That's until there is a lead that Chris comes across, and it turns out that the person responsible for his little girl's death was much closer to him than he first thought. So what he does from that point on is seek vengeance in order to try and get some justice for his little girl's demise. So whether or not he can do this and what happens at the end, that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Daddy's Little Girl. This one is a very interesting film. Now, number one, the acting is not very good. There were parts in the movie where it was, but then other parts where it was a little bit iffy. So it is a low-budget Australian movie, so don't expect anything of quality sort of acting, production value. I thought the sound was very much off. Sometimes it was low and you couldn't really hear it. It was kind of muffled out by the background noise. And other moments it was a bit loud. So it feels like the production value wasn't as polished as it probably should have been. So if you're going on a technical level, you're not going to get much out of this film. It is a torture porn film. I know a lot of people hate that term, and so do I. But if anything was torture porn, Daddy's Little Girl is definitely one, because it has a story at the start, and then basically the last half hour or so is just pure torture. And so if you don't like that kind of thing, I would steer well away from this film. This is a very extreme film. I will say that this is the most extreme film I've ever seen come out of Australia. Some of the torture sequences are absolutely cringeworthy. I was still thinking about it after the film finished. I was still cringing, and it made me feel sick. Basically, the stuff that happens is just ghastly, and it's very interesting. I'll go into why it's interesting a little bit later, but I will say that the effects, the gore effects, are fantastic. But unfortunately, everything else isn't quite fantastic. As I said, the acting is a little bit off, but for a low-budget film, I thought the fact that it had very strong gore was its saving grace, because ultimately it does get a message across. Now, that message is it okay to absolutely torture what you consider a monster? And if you do the torturing, does that make you a monster as well? And it was very interesting, because at the start of the movie, you see him as a very loving person, and his daughter is a very beautiful little girl. And when this daughter is taken away from him, the viewer gets very angry at whoever did this. And when the revelation comes about as to who did this, you want to see the worst possible pain inflicted on this guy. So when the torture starts happening, you think, yeah, this guy deserves it. But as it goes further and further and gets more extreme, you think to yourself, wow, I'm sort of sympathizing for this guy. Then you stop and think, you say to yourself, well, why am I sympathizing for such a monster? And the reason is because what started off as the good guy has now turned into the monster, and now the monster has turned into the victim, so it's reversed itself. And it makes you think, is violence the answer? And the answer to that is no, because violence can just turn any one of us into someone who is basically just as bad. Now, obviously, the father didn't do, the things that the killer did, but basically by torturing him, he's putting himself in that same sort of area. So a psychotic individual, and what he's doing is not right, and two wrongs don't make a right. And that's basically the message of the film, and I thought it was a very good message, in that you can do as much torture as you want, but it's never going to get, in this instance, that little girl back. So it's basically not doing anything except turning you into the monster that you weren't in the first place. So it's showing you the power of rage, it's showing you the power of emotion, and basically just, not controlling it and just letting it unfold uncontrollably. So I thought that was the best part of the film, and I wasn't expecting that. It made me think a lot. It made me think as to what I would do in that instance. As I said, initially I would basically want to hurt that person as much as possible. But when you see all these bad things happen and they get worse and worse and you're cringing so badly, you start to develop mercy for this monster. And that's something that makes you feel very uncomfortable, because the crimes that this guy committed, absolutely unforgivable. They're the worst crimes, in my opinion, involving children. But then it just gets lost in its rage, that you think to yourself, well, I've kind of forgotten what this guy's done, because so much pain is inflicted on him that I want to see it finished, because no one basically should have to go through this, regardless of what crimes they committed. So obviously the answer is, let the justice system take place and take care of it, because what this father was doing basically turned him into the monster. And so none of these characters are the good guys, because what started off as a good guy has taken down a path where it's inexcusable. You can't torture people like that. And although you would say to yourself that I'd rip their balls off, they ever touch my child, yes, that's the initial thought. But then when it actually starts happening, it's completely different. It goes from fantasy to reality. And that's when things, you really open your eyes and you think to yourself, wow, this, even if this person has done something terrible, it's still, it's a little bit too much. So I really like that aspect of it, and for that reason I would say it definitely comes recommended. I didn't like the fact that some of the film felt a little bit exaggerated for the purpose of being a movie. Some of the dialogue between the characters was okay. I thought the script was okay, and some of the exchanges they were having, it felt like you're a fly on the wall, so it felt very realistic. But just the way the movie turns into a revenge sort of film and torture porn, as I labelled, it feels exaggerated to the point where you think, when the revelation happens, and this guy is very close to this father, I'm not going to give it away, but you think to yourself, how would the father turn that quickly on someone who is very close to him? And I thought to myself, well, that was kind of an overnight thing. Yes, this guy has been torn to pieces by what's happened, but it was still a little bit of a stretch to suggest that he could do these horrible things to this particular person instead of just dobbing him into the police. So I thought there was a little bit of bending of reality and plausible sort of actions from the characters just to make a film like this. And so if you can look past that, I thought it's a torture porn film. As I said, I don't like saying that, but if there ever was a case of torture porn, Daddy's Little Girl is definitely it. I didn't think it had as much emotion as another film that's very similar to this. It's a French-Canadian film called 7 Days. I thought 7 Days was better because it didn't feel as forced. Now, another problem I had with Daddy's Little Girl, was the fact that at the start of the film, the daughter was talking to the father like it was her last day on earth, like she knew she was going to die, because she's always saying, Daddy, I love you. Daddy, I love you. I love you. I love you. You think to yourself, well, not every single day a kid is going to say that. And it felt like this kid knew she was going to die. So she was saying her last goodbyes at every given possible opportunity. So basically what that says to the viewer is that, they're very connected. It doesn't need character development so much, but you know that they love each other because they're saying it. They're not saying it through body language. They're not saying it through subtleties. They're saying it to you over and over again, so it has more of an impact when it comes to the torture porn stuff. But it doesn't really, because I didn't feel the connection as much as I should have, because maybe it was being force-fed too much, where you think to yourself, well, let the viewer make up their mind as to whether or not these two are close. And if it had the right acting, the right script, I thought it could have got that message across, as is the case with 7 Days, this film. I thought this movie really does get the message across, because it feels like you're taking in just their daily lives, and they're not saying to each other they love each other at every given opportunity, and so that doesn't feel as forced, but this one does, and that's another thing I didn't like about it. So overall, Daddy's Little Girl is a very extreme film. The gore effects are phenomenal. There's a little bit of story and development in there, but I thought it was more a case of torture porn, just basically getting to the torture sequences as opposed to generating some very realistic characters. But there are some very likable qualities about the film, and for the simple fact that it will make you think, I think this is one of the better Australian low-budget films going out there. So overall, for Daddy's Little Girl, I'm going to give it 3 stars for the simple fact that it made me think and it made me cringe. And that's everything that you want from a horror film. Alright guys, that's my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.